The founder of Starbucks Coffee, Howard Schultz, once said, "When you're surrounded by people who share a collective passion around a common purpose, anything is possible." Now, I'm not sure that anything is possible, but I am sure, as far as this conference is concerned, and as far as children with disability are concerned, that lots of things unimagined are possible. I suggest we can achieve amazing outcomes for children with developmental delay if the whole family is supported, not just the child, if settings for families are warm and welcoming so that families feel safe and secure, if professionals are kind, positive and energetic and work hard at gaining the trust of the family, and if professionals help the family from the very, very beginning, if the professionals firmly believe that it's not just about the child. That's why I've called my speech, "It's all about us, the family." I want to preface my speech by saying to any parents that may be here, I wish to say to you the reason that I wanted to do this talk was for you, even though this is probably more aimed at professionals. I felt when I said yes to Sandra that I wanted to help some families. I thought that that if I could help or comfort the families, this is just a little bit high, that's probably better, that if I could help or comfort one family member just a little by my words and my experience, then this experience today will be worth it. So family members, take what you want from my speech, discard the rest. It won't all apply to you, but I'm sure that there is some common ground between your families and mine. My speech is roughly divided into two sections. The first section is more about Isabel and, I'm just looking at this photo here. My speech is firstly about Isabel and the early days, and the second section is about the family. But through it all, I've peppered stories with anecdotes of how some professionals helped us and some professionals who didn't. But bear in mind, this is the late 80s, early 90s, so I'm sure things are very different today. If you drive down Pyrie Street, a quiet street in suburban Hobart, you'll notice a square grey brick building, dilapidated, with cream torn curtains hanging at the window. It's a sad, lonely-looking building, and I'm sure some of the people here will remember it, some of the people from Hobart. Sandra Schupter definitely will. This building's been abandoned for years, but for me in the early 90s, it was anything but a sad place. In fact, this building enfolded the beginnings of relationships, which I think totally saved my sanity. It was called Dalton Annex, and it was the centre in those days where the children with the most significant disabilities in southern Tasmania received early intervention services. I say it wasn't a sad place for me. In fact, I would go so far to say that it was a haven of hope and encouragement in those very early years when I was very new to the world of mothering a child with severe disability. Despite the stark outward appearance of the building itself, inside it was warm and inviting, and I loved being there. The staff, every single one of them, were warm, compassionate people who always welcomed with enthusiasm our little girl Isabel and myself and any other members of our family who attended. I learned there to totally focus on Isabel's achievements rather than her delays, to celebrate her milestones and to wait patiently, oh so very, very patiently, for the next little developmental spurt. It was at early intervention that I first began to notice Isabel's growing enthusiasm for all things musical, her love of books, her courageous efforts to communicate, but mostly her utter doggedness to push herself forward in social situations, always wanting to be the centre of attention, attributes which she still displays very much today. To give you a brief picture of the early days, Isabel was born full term on the 9th of June 1987, our fourth daughter and our last child. Her three older sisters, Claire, Madeline and Bridget, were 12, 10 and 7 respectively at the time. My husband Chris and I had been married for 16 years at that stage, and we did think that we would not have more than 3 children. So the pregnancy was a complete surprise, and the baby much anticipated because of that element of surprise. Isabel's birth was a normal, easy vaginal delivery, about 5 hours in length. She seemed sleepy and was slow to breastfeed at first, but I did not think this was anything to worry about. Claire had been like that too. Neither did the paediatrician at any stage mention to us that he was concerned about her. In fact, he said to me, I can clearly remember, she's another perfect specimen, which is the words he had used with my other 3 daughters. We were besotted with her, especially the girls. For 6 weeks, our life was bliss and very busy but blissful. However, by the time she was 7 weeks old, she was not smiling. Her head control was non-existent. She rarely unfurled her fists. She had absolutely no eye contact or eye tracking. Despite the fact that she continued to breastfeed well, slept well and was gaining weight, I went back to the paediatrician for reassurance. He, however, seemed unconcerned about her lack of eye contact and smiling and told me the problems were nothing to worry about. He said that her head may have been caused by some problem that the way that she was holding her head in utero. He said, go home and stop worrying about it, and told me not to worry. He should have said to me, and this is my first, I don't know whether there's any paediatricians in the audience, he should have said to me, you know what you're talking about. You are a 4th-time mother. Even at this stage, you know what a 7-week-old baby should be doing. I take your concerns seriously. Please come back to me in 2 to 3 weeks and we will see if these issues are showing any signs of resolving. But he didn't say any of that. Despite his reassurance, my anxieties grew. At 6 months, the child health sister, tested Isabel's development. She once again reassured me, as she had done at 3 months, that Isabel had not reached any of her milestones, that this was not really a problem. All children develop at different rates, she said, and do go home and stop worrying. But I didn't, and my anxiety grew some more. Very soon after this, according to a journal I kept at the time, a close friend said point blank to me, I think there's something wrong with Isabel. She urged me to see my doctor. My anxiety by this time was through the roof. For months, my thoughts had alternated between intense fear of the future and self-denial, trying to concoct some lame, stupid excuse as to why Isabel's development was so slow. Some days later, Chris and I returned to the paediatrician. He now acknowledged our concerns and stated Isabel had a gap of 4 months, some 4 months in her development at 6 months, so she'd only developed to a 2-month stage. However, much to my disgust, he said it was too early to pinpoint anything and that we should go home and wait another 3 months to see if the gap narrowed or became wider. I'm very clear about the details of this from my journal, so I'm not making this up to any paediatricians that are in the audience. With the benefit of hindsight, we should have asked for a second opinion, but we didn't. I look back on that me and my husband of 26 years ago, and I cannot believe we took his words and we just went home. I was fuming that the paediatrician did not confirm then what I felt was certain, that this was going to be a permanent, lifelong delay. My certainty created a distance between Chris and me. He kept reassuring me with the paediatrician's words And I kept angrily reiterating, he either doesn't know what he's talking about or is too scared to tell us the truth. I knew there was something wrong and that the something was not going to be a small problem. This was the very beginning of me starting to think that I knew far more about Isabel than any doctor. The feeling grew and grew over the years, so much so that my 3 girls, Claire, Madeline, Bridget, in their teens, started to call me Dr. Bullshit, a label which I still wear today. If you're a new parent to this world, this will happen to you too. You become the absolute expert on your child very, very quickly, and you will end up with the most incredible knowledge, and none of it's bullshit, about your child's development. This is all part of the confidence-building aspect of raising a child with developmental delay. At times, it actually will give you quite a buzz. So we waited then in the summer of 87, 88 in a haze of unexpressed, subdued fear until Isabel was nearly 9 months old when we went back to the paediatrician. He finally admitted that the likelihood of the gap closing was non-existent. I could have actually told him that 3 months earlier. He then said that Isabel was not going to be normal. That was what he came out with. He said he did not believe in labelling and he did not believe in referring me to early intervention at that stage. They were the words he used. How amazing. In one sentence he said, she's not going to be normal, and a few seconds later he says he doesn't believe in labelling. He basically sent us on our way with a few referrals saying he'd be in touch when the results of the tests came back that he'd ordered. Now, this is what he should have said to us. I want to reassure you that we will work through this together. I'm going to order some tests so we might be able to find a diagnosis for Isabel. A label may answer some of the questions you might have. I will also refer you to early intervention services. You and your family and Isabel will benefit immensely from contact with the professionals there and the programs they offer. There you will meet other parents who are going through similar experiences to you. And there's nothing like meeting other people that understand what you're actually experiencing. But he didn't say any of that. So we went home that day with heightened anxiety, but also pretty stunned. Though Chris was more optimistic about Isabel's future than I was, we both recognised that this was permanent drama in our lives. I remember feeling a deep chronic sorrow for many, many months, and I developed, I'm sorry to say, an appalling sense of detachment from Isabel. She seldom smiled at me and never laughed and was totally silent except for the occasional bout of crying, and even did that rarely. I suddenly felt consigned to a different world, that the baby I had born had died, and that the baby I was left holding, I neither loved nor wanted. I felt like her nurse or her carer rather than her mother, and I could not imagine in those very early days that these feelings would ever change. But oh, how very wrong I was. We told the girls as little as possible. We said that Isabel would have some difficulties and her development would be slow, and they seemed to accept this in the beginning. They were intermittently a little sad and confused, but at the same time were absolutely besotted with her. In fact, for about 18 months, much to my displeasure, they argued every single time she woke from sleep about who was going to get her out of the cot and play with her. It's my turn, it's my turn, it's my turn. I can still hear them. Searching for a diagnosis for Isabel proved to be a long and fruitless journey. The tests ordered by the paediatrician, including a brain scan and a chromosome count, failed to lead to a diagnosis. And indeed, every test over the years which Isabel has endured always came back with the same results, normal. A visiting neurologist said that her unusual ears, nose, feet, mouth and eyes were indicative of some unknown syndrome and advised us, and these were his words, "Don't sacrifice your other children for this child. Nothing you do will make any difference." Now, this is the late 80s, so thankfully it's not like that anymore. A geneticist said this was probably a chance mutation at birth. Nature experimenting, he said to us. Both these cold clinical specialists have thankfully long retired. They exemplified how not ever to treat parents who are still stunned by the news that their child is not developing normally. There was not a hint of empathy or kindness in their manners. Thankfully, however, the specialists who replaced them after only a couple of years and who we have seen over the years are compassionate and warm individuals. They have always delivered the message of no diagnosis yet in a thoughtful, caring way. As far as development went, you may be wondering how that progressed. We learned to be very, very patient. Isabel crawled when she was nearly 2. She took her first steps at 3.5, walked consistently and confidently by age 5, and uttered her first word at about 3 years. She now communicates mainly through sign, some gestures, some words, and a few very, very well-practiced phrases. At age 16, a report by a school guidance officer for the purpose of obtaining the disability support pension pinpointed, wait for it, her developmental age somewhere between 3 and 14 months. I did not believe that. It was a most pointless exercise, other than firstly to ensure she would definitely qualify for the disability support pension, and secondly, I'm ashamed to admit, it ensured that I drank myself into a stupor that night to wipe that despicable sentence from my brain. My husband was out. I took one of his nice bottles of red wine, and I don't remember much else about the evening. I would say now she falls somewhere in the 2 to 3-year-old spectrum developmentally, but that's really another pointless exercise. I never think about that anymore. However, if you want to imagine where she fits functionally, that may be fairly accurate. When people ask me now what is wrong, I answer Isabel is fully mobile, but has a very severe intellectual disability, the cause of which is still undiagnosed, but which was present from conception. This is all we've ever been able to confirm. At school, her record stated she had severe global developmental delay and multiple disabilities. We gave up the intense search for diagnosis long, long ago, although every 6 years or so, blood tests are taken just to see if there's any advances made in the human genome testing. The most recent tests were done last year, still failed to come up with an answer, but that didn't worry me at all. It would not now make any difference to Isabel's life, but I still think, despite what the paediatrician said all those years ago, it may be still helpful to have a label. So that's the first section of my talk, and I'm going to go on now to talk a little bit more about the family. Often as parents of a child with disability, we may inadvertently sacrifice the needs of the rest of the family for the needs of that child. When Isabel was born, she became just one of a family of 6. It was possible with the help of the right professionals, including those who wisely steered us towards accessing respite services, including our own Sandra Shupta. She advised me to do that, to ensure that Isabel's needs did not become all-consuming to the detriment of the other members of the family. By the time Isabel was about 15 months, Claire, Madeline, Bridget, Chris and I were grieving for the loss of the child that we had all dreamed about and planned for and spoken about together with such excitement during the pregnancy. The whole family had formed an idea of a child that we expected to grow alongside us and add love and joy to our family. But in these early years, the child that arrived did not match that dreamt of child, the child that we had hoped for. The future we saw ahead of us did not reconcile with the future we had planned. And so we all grieved for what we felt we had lost. It was normal and it was a natural process to be gotten through, and we did get through it very, very well. The trouble was, however, that most often or not we grieved as individuals rather than together, and so to bring comfort to each other was rather difficult. I was usually able to comfort and help the children by sitting and talking to them and allowing them to cry. But the frustrating part was that I could offer no magic wand to wave the problem away. All I could do was validate their feelings, reassure them that we would be okay as a family, and listen to how they felt. The pain of watching them hurt, particularly the older two, and not being able to do anything concrete about it was far, far worse than my own pain. As I have said, Chris was more optimistic than me, and so when I was at my lowest, he was still feeling quite hopeful for Isabel's future, whereas when he began to feel more frightened for what the future had ahead, I was beginning to adjust a little. Because of the depth of sadness and anger in us at different times, we were not able to be of much comfort to each other. Rather, at that stage, we drew apart and got on with our different roles. It's sad now, I must say that we are still together, and he's in the audience here somewhere. It is sad to look back now and think that for many years we suffered mostly in silence apart. We progressed through our own stages of grief in our own time without offering any real solace to each other. I think counselling for us as a couple at this stage would have helped tremendously. I remember the first place I visited for physio not far from where I live now. I self-referred against the advice of the stupid paediatrician. Isabel was 10 months old, and this was long before she attended early intervention. Kind and dynamic physiotherapist called Leonie took us in. She seemed extremely interested in Isabel. She tutted when I told her the paediatrician had advised me to wait for referral till Isabel was 15 months, and that labelling would do her no good. Remember, this is the 80s, and thankfully I'm sure this advice would never be given nowadays. Leonie agreed with him quite openly and affirmed that any extra stimulation that could be provided at this stage would only be of help. I was starved of the sight of other people gooing and fussing over Isabel at this stage. Even at this early stage of her life, it seemed many people, even some friends and family, once they knew about her delayed development, chose to ignore her. So I savoured the visits with Leonie, not only for the information she offered, but for her interactions with Isabel. She constantly praised Isabel and me and acted as if, rather than Isabel being a problem, she was an absolute delight to behold. This particular aspect of Leonie for me was like a tonic. I just couldn't get enough. For the first time in many months, I began to experience a slight lift in my mood, an easing of that dreaded sadness that seemed to be always stuck in my chest. And this tiny buzz had a ripple effect. The days that I went to physio were my happiest, and my happiness was infectious at home. And thus we began to take our first tiny steps back towards normality. Chris and I still didn't talk through our worries much for fear of worrying each other. How stupid was that? But the healing, I think, had begun. Leonie worked with Isabel for 3 months, but in the spring of '88, she referred us on to a private rehab centre with children with high needs were seen. Funny that I remember being really pleased to be told that. Not pleased that Leonie had said that Isabel's needs were indeed very significant, but that she delivered some hope that more intensive therapy might help. And I knew I would meet some other mums there that I could talk to. Leonie had strengthened my confidence, enhanced my knowledge, and I was taking my first tentative steps back towards acceptance. So in late '88, Isabel and I first attended Douglas Parker Rehab Centre. Any Tasmanians in the audience might remember that. And we commenced 14 months of intensive physio and OT and spasmodic speech therapy. During those months, my knowledge of child development became intensely detailed. Before Isabel was born, I knew a little bit about major milestones simply through watching the other girls develop normally. But by the time Isabel was 2, I felt I was the absolute expert. I didn't realise it at the time, but this increase in my knowledge was building on my confidence. Add this to an expanding sense of hope, plus the kindness I was being shown by all the therapists around me, and the shrinking sense of isolation which came from being part of this community, I was well underway towards regaining a sense of control over my own life. The therapists at rehab were compassionate, warm and dynamic, just like Leonie. I felt safe and secure when I was there with them, and I trusted them completely. I saw them as totally competent and knowledgeable, and I practiced everything at home that they asked me in every single detail. I stimulated and played with Isabel at home for what seemed like hours every day, and I tried desperately never to miss any sessions at rehab. However, and I apologise to any therapist that may be in the audience today, after some months of this routine, there crept in a slight shift in my attitude to therapy. I began to suspect that our world would not totally implode if I missed the odd practice session at home. How daring of me. Perhaps I could reduce it from 2 hours to 1 hour and a half, maybe to 1 hour if I was really devilish. More and more I began to see myself as the expert on Isabel's needs, and I gradually began to suspect, shock horror, that the way I was doing the program at home could be altered slightly to accommodate both Isabel's needs and those of the family too. As she slowly developed, I began to try to integrate more of her therapy into a normal daily routine at home, e.g. while I was feeding, dressing, bathing her. She started to develop an interest in music and books, and it dawned on me that maybe I should be taking more of my cues from her. I suppose without knowing what it was called, we were starting to develop a strength-based program, which is what we still do today. We were beginning to understand that each member of the family, including Isabel, had a certain resilience that we could tap into, that we needed to focus on where she was each day, not look at her limits and weaknesses, but to pay attention to and work with her current strengths, interests particularly, and abilities. In brief, it slowly dawned on me that she didn't have to be fixed. And so I began to occasionally omit some of the exercises that I felt were not really necessary. For instance, now I must say that Isabel really hasn't got any physical disability, so I, to anybody with a child with cerebral palsy, this, don't take any notice of me basically here. For instance, I didn't want to put her in the dreaded standing frame anymore. She hated it. She rarely cried, but she would cry in the standing frame. I hated it, and I made the decision one day to take it back to the physio and said I was not going to do it anymore. To my surprise, the physio just said that's fine. I was getting myself ready for an argument. I began to be more assertive at rehab and tell the therapists if I disagreed with whatever they might be proposing. This taking over the reins myself gave me more confidence, and so over a period of months, my relationship with the therapist changed from being one of a leader and a client to one of collaboration, and then almost to the point where I actually began to think that I was the boss. This feeling of confidence snowballed and gave rise in turn to more hope for the future, and that in turn accelerated the improvement in things at home. I could see the resilience of the family as an entity building before my eyes, and slowly my normal maternal feelings began to resurface. I was feeling less and less like her carer, and finally more like her mother. I was approaching my 40th birthday by this stage. Claire was close to 15, Madeline nearly 13, Bridget almost 10, and Isabel was 2.5. I'd gone back to work for 2, sometimes 3 full days a week, and so with all the demands of a very big family, life was extremely hectic. I realised about this time, if I was going to be in all this for the long haul, I would have to become a little more selfish. As they say on the airlines, fit your own mask first. And boy, did I become the expert there. I started to secure tiny snatches of my time during my day to relax instead of racing around like a maniac doing housework. The house was pretty messy most of the time, although it was clean. I told Chris one day, as he saved himself from falling over a pile of toys and books in the hall, I don't want someone to stand up at my funeral and just say she kept a good house. Near enough is good enough became my mantra for the housework, and it still is. I made more frequent arrangements to meet friends when I could at night and began again to enjoy old pastimes of sewing and began a course in hand quilting. I took up learning Spanish at some stage. That hasn't done me a lot of good. And Chris and I were getting out much more with each other. Claire was by this time happy to babysit. Things were very chaotic, but the dreaded anxiety and sadness were definitely easing a lot. I was becoming more confident I could cope and the family would be okay. I felt that the control over Isabel's life and mine, and hence the orchestration of family life, was back in my hands rather than the hands of the professionals, which is where I had previously willingly placed it. So you might be thinking, well, what's all this got to do with good outcomes for Isabel? What began to happen was that with more energy, we seemed to have far more time for our everyday natural interactions with her. The girls were, by this stage, in their teens. They danced for what seemed like hours and hours, particularly the younger two, easing her into their adolescent music and chatter with or without all their friends, boyfriends, girlfriends being present. Communication with Isabel increased and we began to see huge progress in her development. Her gross motor skills were accelerating and she began to finally display some intention with her mobility. During this period, her love of books became more evident. She loved any book with a rhyme and repetitive rhythm, as long as it was read with dramatic facial expression. Her concentration and attention span were seemingly endless if you kept reading to her. This is still the case today. Her eye contact, which at times can be totally non-existent, will become magically focused if you read her a book. Isabel moved from rehab to early intervention in 1990 when she was 2.5. Sandra Shukta was her first teacher. Before the term started, Sandra visited us at home and I liked her instantly. She was and still is vibrant, as many of you will know, full of optimism. She convinced me that this was going to be so much fun and so good for Isabel. I had no idea then that Sandra was going to be such a godsend to the whole family and especially to me. She taught Isabel for 3 years and in that time taught me, through her example, to watch out for and focus on Isabel's achievements rather than her failures. She taught me how to see how far she'd come, not how far she still had to go. Through Sandra's reactions and facial expressions and gestures, she showed me her joy and celebration in Isabel's tiniest, hardly perceivable developments, and also the big ones. Sandra was actually there in our sunroom at our house the day in 1991 when Isabel took her first step. In short, Sandra sowed the seeds in me of celebrating diversity. My history after that, going on with becoming involved with disability organisations, is a whole other story. But that's where it began. At early intervention, I learned to break up Isabel's demanding journey with lots of so-called pit stops. I learned to stop and rest for a while at each milestone, a new sign, a word, a step, to sit down for a while, metaphorically, and savour and celebrate the milestone. If I didn't look too far ahead down the path, it all appeared suddenly to be manageable and far less overwhelming. I began to worry less about Isabel being left behind. Her normal peers eventually just became that. Her normal peers, different, very different to her, yes, but they were not competitors in a race. Sandra introduced key signing concepts to the class that first year, And frankly, I thought she was nuts, totally nuts. I could not imagine that Isabel would have any idea how to sign. After all, one therapist had told me Isabel was, these were her words, this is in my diary, by far the worst case of dyspraxia she had ever seen. Another case of what not to say to a grieving parent. How much better if she'd said to me, Isabel has extreme difficulties with motor planning and coordination of movement. Despite my reservations, however, Isabel strangely showed immediate interest in signing and watched the repetitive movements of our hands intently. She also showed extreme pleasure at being part of repetitive coactive signing, the word and our exaggerated facial expressions. Eventually, one day, after many, many months of repeating the sign for more, over and over, when we were offering food or something else that motivated her, she positioned her hand jerkily underneath her chin and flicked it outwards. Being the pessimist that I was, I didn't sort of recognise it, but Sandra said, you know, we'll do the more again, and she repeated this. And so, to me, it seemed like a total miracle. It was the beginning of her 25-year courageous battle to communicate against huge odds. Her version of more was close enough to the real sign, and so we adapted that as our sign for more when we were communicating with her. She eventually replaced the sign with the word ma and went on fairly quickly to learn many, many signs. She continues to use sign as her main means of communication today. If she's listening to others talk, she will sign intermittently all the words she understands, obviously trying to make sense of what we're talking about. She will sign appropriately and sometimes very inappropriately. My third daughter, Bridget, has taught her all sorts of terrible things, which I won't repeat here. A morning greeting these days to drag me out of bed can be hungry, appropriate, but can also be followed by a speedy series of animals if I don't respond straight away. Elephant, sheep, dog, frog, and cat. She's learned that these signs, when she signs them in a quick sequence, it'll always make me laugh. So if I'm hanging on to the idea that I want to stay in bed, it'll bring about a shift in that refusal to move. And so invariably, she's rewarded with her breakfast, and of course, the oh, you know the word I'm trying to look for. It goes on. Reinforcement. She will also display the same series of signs at the supermarket checkout, and on being asked what she's saying, I have to reply, sheep, elephant, frog, dog, cat. And I explaining she's trying to make a connection with you, which is what she's doing, because she has learned that always brings a laugh, as it did now. Of course, this will endear her to the person serving us, and they will immediately talk to her if they've been ignoring her. And so she's probably thinking to herself, well, that worked again, I'll do that again. And so the reinforcement goes on. Amongst many other things Sandra introduced as early intervention was the toilet. Again, I thought, this woman is definitely crazy. Isabel's 2.5 and showed no understanding whatsoever of what the toilet was about at that stage. But to my surprise, Isabel eventually grasped the idea that this, the toilet, not the nappy or the pants, is where it all happens. I did not yet understand that we could not let Isabel train herself, as I had done her sisters. We needed to be proactive from the very beginning. Perhaps she thought, this huge, cold, white bowl can keep me clean and dry. Or perhaps it was the thought, if I sit here for a while, I always have one-to-one attention. I suspect it may be the latter. I won't bore you with all the dreaded poo stories along the way, but suffice to say, today she handles nearly all of the aspects of her bodily function with confidence and complete dignity. Some of you may be wondering what her life is like today. She's 27 now and lives in supported accommodation with 3 other young adults with similar support needs. She has a fulfilling life with interests such as horse riding, swimming, attending the theatre, lots and lots of pop concerts, loves her drama classes and still listens to a wide range of music and still loves her books. She has regular interstate holidays, especially to Melbourne, for shopping and visiting Claire and Madeline, who live in Melbourne, and to Queensland for the sun. She comes home to us from her group home for 24 hours once a fortnight, and we talk on the phone regularly in between times. While I talk, she listens, and the support worker in the background tells me what she's signing. She hasn't yet got the idea that I can't actually see the signs. She listens, breathes heavily, very heavily into the phone, blows kisses and repeatedly says, "Miss your mum." So we're nearing the end of what I want to say today, and I'd just like to finish with a serious story about a ghost that I once knew. Years ago, up until Isabel was about 10, I used to see a ghost in her wake. The ghost didn't merely appear, I used to put her there on purpose. I would deliberately conjure up specific images of what she may have been like, what I felt she should have been like, had she been normal. The ghost was always beautiful. She had the same sleek dark hair, the same deep brown eyes, the same olive skin and full mouth as the real Isabel has. But there were many differences too. For example, that's Bridget, that photo in the that photo there, that's Bridget the day she got married with Isabel. And this means that Isabel's feeling very emotional. The same olive skin and full mouth as the real Isabel has. But there were many, many differences too. For example, the ghost that I knew, her eyes were intently focused all the time, bright and full of expression, and she would speak to me clearly, responding to my questions with thought and deliberation. I had a pile of stored images to draw on to make the ghost seem real. I took these images from memories of her 3 older sisters' lives. They'd left me with the absolute precise knowledge of what should really have been happening to Isabel at each and every stage of her life. I stupidly tortured myself with these images for many, many years. I don't think I was crazy. I'm sure the ghost was just a normal part of my grief, and I'm happy to say that I have not seen that ghost for many, many years. At some stage, I decided emphatically to let her go, the ghost, that is. It took me a while, but eventually I said goodbye to her. I turned my back on her and turned my attention full time to the dearly loved Isabel, the expressions, the gestures and needs of the flesh and blood daughter who lived with us. I began more and more to recognise there were so many things to celebrate about her. The joy of new words, new skills, new interests, the lessons learned from living with her, all those lessons that we have learned. The new friendship emerging with her as her understanding of spoken language took very, very regular developmental spurts. And of course, all those people that we would never have met had it not been for Isabel. The ghost, I'm sure, would never have taught us, the whole family, such lessons so quickly, nor introduced us to all those other tenacious families, warm and wise people from such very varied walks of life. And of course, without Isabel, we would never have met the caring, devoted professionals, the health professionals, the support workers, and especially the teachers and the aides who allowed me to let go of that ghost with absolute confidence and who helped us as a family from the very beginning to appreciate and celebrate Isabel's differences, her strengths, her determined efforts to communicate, the courage she shows in the face of all the frustrations she calmly endures as a result of her disability. In short, the guts and grit which we, all her family, Claire, Madeline, Bridget, Chris and I, believe that she continues to display every single day of her life. Thank you. Now